You're listening to the Psychedelic Couch. Before we delve into today's episode, which includes conversation around psychedelics, we want to remind our listeners that the use of illicit drugs carries significant risks and legal consequences. Psychedelic substances, including but not limited to LSD, psilocybin, DMT, and MDMA, are classified as illegal in many countries, including here in the UK. The possession, distribution, and consumption of these substances can result in legal penalties, including fines and imprisonment. Furthermore, the use of psychedelics can have profound effects on one's mental and physical health. While some individuals report positive experiences, such as expanded consciousness and therapeutic benefits, others may experience negative effects, such as anxiety, paranoia, and psychosis. These substances can also interact unpredictably with medications and exacerbate underlying mental health conditions. They are also not suitable for anyone under the age of 25. It's essential to approach the topic of psychedelics with caution and responsibility. The views and experiences shared in this podcast are for informational purposes only and should not be interpreted as encouragement or advocacy for the use of illegal substances. If you or someone you know is struggling with substance abuse, we encourage you to seek support from qualified healthcare professionals or local addiction support services. With that said, let's proceed with today's episode, keeping in mind the importance of informed discussion and harm reduction. Dr. Molly Maloof specialises in tailoring health optimization and personalised medical solutions for high-achieving entrepreneurs, investors and technology leaders. Prior to founding Adamo Bioscience, she spent 3 years pioneering a course on healthspan with Stanford University's Wellness Department. Her company, Adamo Bioscience, is dedicated to showcasing the measurable impact of human connection on healing processes. At the forefront of her endeavours is the development of the Adamo method, a groundbreaking sex therapy program designed to address sexual dysfunction, enhance relationship bonds, and promote sexual health. With over a decade of experience, she has advised and consulted over 50 companies in digital health, consumer health, and biotechnology. Dr. Maloof, also the author of The Spark Factor, leads the charge in personalised medicine, digital health technologies, biofeedback-assisted lifestyle interventions, psychedelic medicine, and evidence-based wellness products and services. Welcome, Dr. Molly. It's wonderful to have you here today.
Thank you, Claire. So grateful to be here.
So I thought maybe you could start by explaining how a medical doctor has found themselves so interested in studying relationships and sexuality.
Yeah. So I have been very, very interested in not just disease, but also health for most of my entire, like pretty much my entire life. And a lot of people go into medicine because they want to solve illness. And I wanted to honestly help resolve human suffering. So most of my life, I've been on a mission to first become a physician. And then in that process, really trying to understand at a first principles level what causes human suffering and what causes illness. And what really surprised me when I kind of grew up and became a physician was just how 80% of the diseases I saw in the hospital were totally preventable, and they were preventable by lifestyle. And so one of the first things that I did as a medical student was as I actually created a course called Physician Heal Thyself, Evidence-Based Lifestyle. And it was the first lifestyle medicine course in the largest medical school in the country. And it was like, I ended up winning a bunch of humanitarian awards for just like really trying to go out of my way to fill in the blanks of the education in our medical system that were missing. And so we were learning about diseases, we were learning about drugs, we were learning about surgery. We were not being taught about prevention effectively. And nutrition was glossed over, sleep was ignored, like exercise was barely discussed, and relationships weren't really even part of our education.
Why do you think that's the case? Why do you think they've been missed for so long? I'm so curious because this is such a recent thing, right?
Right. I mean, I think the pandemic created a global awareness of what isolation does to people. And I think it also shed a lot of light on relationship problems that show up, right? When people are put in confined spaces. We just ran this like huge experiment globally on a lot of people. And what we discovered was that like people need people to thrive. And we also discovered that there's a lot of there's a lot of problems under the surface in a lot of people's relationships that don't get discussed, don't get dealt with. And a lot of people are kind of like just running on autopilot in life. When I was teaching at Stanford, this course called Live Better Longer, Extending Health Span for Longer Lifespan. What I did not know until I was teaching this course was like loneliness is worse for your health than smoking, drinking, sedentary behavior, and obesity. And I was like, what? Wait, I've been so obsessed with obesity and nutrition for the last decade. How did I miss this thing about human connection? Like, how did I miss that? And then I started studying the work of Helen Fisher. And I found this paper she wrote, and it was all about the motivational drives of human connection, of love, and this sort of model of evolutionary biology, which is that we have sex in order to actually find a mate, in order to actually become literally physiologically addicted to this person, so that we become attached to them, so that we can stick around long enough to raise children and keep and the longer we stay with our children and our families, the longer we live. So the bigger communities we have, the more protection we have against disease, disability, and just overall, the more resources we have, because the more connections we have, the more that's available for everyone, right? And it's like thinking about a tree being grown by itself in a desert versus like a tree in a rainforest. Like it's a totally different ecosystem, right? There's a lot more symbiotic relationships going on than like a single organism on its own. And so I really felt like I had unlocked like this like fundamental aspect of human existence. Like it made sense to me, like life made sense. And what also made sense to me was how social injury, was how death and grief, was how breakups, was how divorce, was how rape and war were so damaging to health.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I found the work by Martine Picard on the stress response and mitochondrial health, I was like, oh my God, now I can connect the two. Now I can connect the need to find resources with the need to actually surround ourselves with people who are actually safe, and the importance of a safe and stable nervous system to optimal metabolic health. And that's when everything just started to gel. And I was like, oh my God, I feel like I finally understand health. And I'm like 40 years old, like I finally get it now. And so when I founded Adamo in 2021, it was because I was really obsessed with this concept of like, is there a science to love? Can we measure it? Can we improve it? And what can we do? And so it started as a psychedelic company. And the reason why is because MDMA transformed my life, helped me heal from sexual trauma on accident, and basically resolved 3 different sexual dysfunctions that I had without me knowing I even had them until they were gone. So I woke up to this like realization that it's not normal to not have arousal before sex. It's not normal to have pain during sex. It's not normal to not orgasm during sex. And that was my entire 20s. And so I thought I was just having bad sex. I just like, okay, whatever, this is what sex is. I had no idea until I did MDMA, and I accidentally healed a traumatic memory, a few traumatic memories that had basically created the conditions in my brain to sense sex as an unsafe experience. And when I had experienced MDMA with a partner in a very respectful, sacred context of sexual union, I would not recommend people. I'm not just recommend people go out and do MDMA and have sex with people. I'm like, it was very safe and intentional experience, but it was like there was a before and there was an after for me. There was like I didn't have good sex to like, I now was able to have normal arousal, normal amounts of no pain, and then I was able to have orgasm. And I was like, what? So when I started my company many years later, it was like I was way too early to the space of psychedelics. But when I saw MAPS come along and say, okay, we're gonna try to commercialize MDMA for PTSD, I said to myself, did I have PTSD? So I went and looked at the characteristics of PTSD, and I was like, I don't fit the criteria. Well, why didn't I fit the criteria? What did MDMA do to fix me? And that's when I started studying sexual trauma and studying how about 30% of women who have sexual trauma will develop PTSD. And it's actually the number one cause of PTSD. But 60 to 80% of them will develop sexual dysfunction. And I was like, holy crap. What if there was a world where you could have psychedelic assisted sex therapy? And so that's why I started the company. It was like I wanted to help women heal from what I had dealt with myself. Now, fast forward, as I was developing this drug combination, it was really, really clear to me that I was looking at like a 25, 30-year journey with like the FDA. And it was not going to be like it like literally the founder of MAPS has been working to commercialize MDMA for 30 years. So I was like, okay, this is going to take me a really long time. And we already have a pretty darn good drug that's about to get approved. So should I really be focusing on psychedelics or should I be focusing on the sex therapy? And I was like, I got to do something because I fundraised and I got to, I got to do something for the world. So that's when I decided I would say, you know what? I've got these two incredible sex therapists I'm working with. They've taught me some really unique things around sexuality that I've never seen anywhere else. So what if I develop this sex therapy and what if we can work within the psychedelic space? And even what if we can work with people who don't want to ever take psychedelics? What about people who just want to have better sex? And so we just started on this path of like coming together. And my job was to figure out how do you measure love? So we developed these measures, these validated questionnaires. And I was like, oh, we're going to design a study and we're going to run a sex study on this new sex therapy. And we're going to deliver this therapy through a digital platform. And honestly, it was like building a parachute while you jump out of an airplane. Like we were literally finishing a product, we were launching a product, we were running a clinical study, we were designing a clinical study, we were launching a clinical study all at the same time. And this is pretty much what startup life taught me working with 50 companies in the last decade in Silicon Valley is you we were actually moving very, very carefully and methodically, and we were definitely not trying to break things. But what we learned was that basically, like when you endeavor on a path of helping people deal with their sexuality, what I discovered is that like this whole space of sexual medicine and and like sex therapy is so tiny. Like it's so small. There's only a couple thousand, maybe less than 1,000, less than 2,000 sex therapists in America. And there's literally millions of doctors. And there's probably millions of psychologists, but there's a tiny fraction of people that are actually educated on how to teach people about sexuality. So one thing we're working on right now is we're working on an AI sex therapist that can be able to help people troubleshoot as they're on this journey with us. But the real vision of the company is that we have as many sex therapists and as many psychologists properly trained in how to prescribe this method so that it's not just people going through it on their own or with a digital, bot. But ideally, I think the product would be much more suited for having someone like you go through it with them and not have them have to be alone in it because what I discovered in the program was like the people who suffered the most challenges in the journey with the Adamo method were the people who probably needed to have a therapist because they didn't know how to handle their triggers. They didn't know how to regulate their nervous system and they didn't know how to get past the things that have been plaguing their relationship for literally years. And so our program was never going to be able to fix those things, And that's kind of like my conclusion is like, we need to properly screen people for like, should you be in therapy?
And for some people, maybe they don't know until it comes up because it's such a kind of
I
tightly
know.
contained area of their life. They think everything's fine because they've actually stayed away from it. It's such a shameful,
Yes.
challenging area. But when you open it up, and you open it up slowly, it becomes really triggering, and people don't necessarily know.
That's the thing. I'm so encouraged by you saying this because we were doing this final Zoom call. I was like, my heart was broken a little bit because, people who had the biggest challenges spoke up. And the people who actually had the biggest wins spoke up too. We had some big wins in this program. And honestly, our early clinical study data is looking really good. Like I was freaking out a little bit. I was like, oh my God, what if we didn't get any results? And I saw the numbers and I'm like, this is looking good. Like this is actually looking like we have like statistical significance. And that's all I've been trying to figure out is like, did we actually measurably improve any markers of human connection? But I do think that the truth is that to transform, you have to go through this hero's journey. And you're gonna if you get to the bottom of like the test allies enemies kind of phase of the hero's journey, it's like there's the innermost cave. And every hero's journey, the innermost cave is like right before you're about to make a massive breakthrough, you feel stuck and you feel like you're at your lowest point in your relationship. And like, I do think that if there was someone to guide people through it, like one-on-one, like, hey, you're gonna get through this. Like, you don't want to give up on this. Because I think it's the people that stopped when they found they got stuck that I don't think they're gonna have good results. Because if you stop doing the program because you got stuck and triggered, then that's probably why you weren't able to make it through, right? And so we learned so much in this program. Like, I cannot tell you the amount of learning that we got from this. And I think it's the beginning of a really exciting phase in where medicine can go, which is like we wanted this to be a therapeutic modality, which is why we ran a study. And we're going to keep running these cohorts until we get this thing optimized so that anyone who goes through it can basically be guaranteed to see some improvement in some facet of their relational health. And like I went through it and I experienced a major breakup in the middle of its program. And I still got a lot of value out of the program, which is like, and I'm the founder, which is pretty wild, you know?
Yeah. And before we go in and talk more about the program itself, I just want you to let listeners know why did you need to reinvent this? What is lacking?
Yeah. So right now, as it stands, my perspective is that the mainstream sexual medicine world does not actually want to look at sex itself. They want to look at everything around it. But the act of actual penetration is a very, very, very delicate place where a lot of people suffer real problems. And sensate therapy basically takes you to that point and maybe gets you a little bit further, but doesn't really take you beyond that, right? So sensate therapy was developed in the 60s by Masters and Johnson. And honestly, I think that most couples should try sensate therapy before they do our program. I think I think we should probably just like partner with a sensate therapy company because there's a lot of people who will benefit tremendously from just not having sex, from just focusing on mindfulness-based sensual touch and just focusing on sensation and sensuality. Like that is a lot of what the early part of our program does involve, but it's not necessarily the exact same thing as sensate therapy. So sensate therapy is like what you do is you and your partner are getting intimate through there's a lot of like you guiding your hand over your body with another person's hand, right? And I'm sure you can speak to this more effectively. But I've looked at the textbooks on sensate therapy and I've spoken to actually our the people that helped us produce the videos. They specifically told us while we were taping in Turkey, he said, I tried sensate therapy and it didn't work for me. It didn't work for me and my partner. And I've never seen something like this before. And this is really exciting and really unique. And like we decided to do it because we felt that there was something missing from sexual medicine. And that was that um, we felt like the focus was not on sex. The focus was on everything but sex. And to me, like the act of sex is something that I did not learn through school. I didn't get sex education that was like, here's how you enjoy painless penetration. Here's how you embody consent. Here's how you know when someone is like here's how you actually deal with someone who's not listening to your no. Like there's a lot of stuff in our program and our protocol that I feel like if I had learned as a young woman, I would have been able to avoid like a lot of trauma. And I think even just talking about sex was really challenging for me for most of my youth. And I feel like what we've done is like we've literally taken sex therapy into the 21st century. And it's not saying we're going to throw out sensate therapy. It's not saying we're going to like diminish it by any means. And in fact, there's even I just discovered very recently that there's another therapy that this woman, Peggy Kleinplatz, she's this Canadian sex therapist. She developed this thing called Magnificent Sex. And she's developed a new sex therapy. And so there's more than one of us doing this right now. I mean, and arguably, like, I think we need as many people trying to tackle this problem as possible because there's so many problems in sex today that we just don't want to talk about. And I want to see sex become as normal to discuss, like sexual health, as normal to discuss as your nutrition, your sleep, and your fitness. And it's not.
And it's so interesting because we know that it's couples that can talk easily about sex that have the most satisfying relationships. It's not the amount of sex, it's not even having the same preference, it's the ability to be able to openly dialogue. And that's where, when some of the cohort was saying they found the first kind of 4 or 5 sessions quite slow, that was interesting because in a way those are the foundations that are so significant that if we can really, and because it's awkward and it's uncomfortable to do, and we are relearning, well, we're learning because we never learned it before, right? We're learning to
Yeah.
do something that is so challenging, and there is that impulse to sort of, let's just get through this bit and get to the main core, get to the penetration, right?
Yeah.
Which in itself is interesting because we know that penetration isn't women's favorite act of sex. That's
And a lot
a
of women
man's.
felt rushed.
Exactly.
A lot of men felt rushed. It felt like things were too slow in the beginning. And a lot of women felt that things were too fast in the end. And it's like, I feel like it was a beautiful reflection of like actually greater societal things around sex. Like, I'm in a new relationship right now, and I'm regularly trying to explain, like, hey, so I've got this intimacy method, and I really want to go through this with you on our next cohort because I would really like if we slowed down. And yet in new relationships, typically there's a lot of drive for sexual contact, right? But there's also a lot of rushing. And I really think that what I love about our program is like we're literally teaching people things like grinding with clothes on. Like people do not understand the beauty of making out. It's so
Mm,
hot and it's so beautiful and it's so sexy and it's like people like Aaron and Seda, they're two ridiculously talented people, but the way that they interact with each other, there's so much affection, there's so much consent at everything they do in their life. They literally embody consent in every way that they interact with themselves as a couple.
mm,
And when I saw it firsthand by being around them, I was like, I'm witnessing like a futuristic relationship where people are incredibly respectful and consensual on every single thing that they do with one another. And I was like,
mm.
the world would be a completely different place.
Totally. And it's that consent with themselves, knowing, hang on, do I want to do this in this moment? We say yes to everything. We
Oh
never
yeah,
check
I
in.
do it
And
all the time.
yeah, and just notice what's happening in our body. And I often think, as a parent, it's so important. That's how we model consent. It's when you check in and just model to your children because they're never going to see you in the bedroom. We learn about sex through our sexual scripts, the sexual script theory. So being able to model consent by just checking in. Actually, it's a no. I know I thought it was a yes, but how do I feel in this moment? Constantly checking in. And I thought that piece was so important. And again, I'm curious because we know that in the early phases of relationship, we might be more inclined to lean towards spontaneous desire. But in committed long-term relationships, it's more responsive, our desire. So we don't have that need to rip each other's clothes off. But when we take time to really connect into our body, so doing the hot genital meditation, we can start to be more aware of the whispering. What's happening in my body? Is there a space where maybe I'd like to be touched? It's a way to move into that place, which is so important.
I mean, there's days even today, even this early relationship where like I'm like he's really turned on and I'm not turned on and I go do the heart genital meditation for a while on my own before he arrives and it's like it's amazing what this one thing, this one connection tool can just do for you. And like I think what one of the things that we intend to do very quickly is like we want to build a quick video for people who are interested in the method and we're going to pick out like three of the top things that we know can make a big breakthrough in someone's sex life and teach them those two things and then and like really get people excited about the rest of the journey because I feel like if we can give people a really big win early on, it's like the challenge with the psychosexual stuff being so thorough in the very beginning is a lot of people are like, just I want to do something somatic. I want to do something with the body. And the truth is you have to lay the foundation with your psychology and with this concept, like learning this concept of erotic individuation took me a while. And I was like, what do you mean erotic individuation? Oh, well, it's not just about me performing for my partner and turning them on. It's about me being in touch with my turn-ons, me being okay that my turn-ons are not the same as someone else's, me being able to talk about the things that turn me on, me realizing that I am an individual in my own sexual experiences, and then the physical facet of sexual sovereignty, like this idea that like you are a sovereign being, your body is yours, it is no one else's, and like nobody has any entitlement to your body. And I once dated a man who basically were like referred to his ex as, well, this is like a crazy thing to say, but he's like, she was freezing her eggs, and I thought I might just like give her some of my sperm if she wanted to have another child. And I was like, um, okay, well, you guys got divorced, so I'm not really understanding why you would want to do that. And he's like, well, it's my womb anyway. And I was like, no, it's not your womb. That's someone else's body, and it's someone else's like decision to do what they want with it. And
Mm,
like, I was really taken aback at how marriage can make people feel like that they own someone. There's still this pervasive idea that marriage means that I am somehow so bonded to you that I own your body too.
mm,
And there's a lot of that in the unfortunate patriarchal world that we live in. And in a lot of countries that are highly patriarchal, and by the way, I'm not a feminist, I'm very into
mm,
egalitarianism. I'm
mm,
like very much about equal. Like I want to live in a world where like it's like Spartan world where women had power and also supported the men. I really love that world, that world of antiquity. I'm like, let's bring that back. But I do see a lot of patriarchal cultures, and I've studied sexual trauma across the world. And like the most patriarchal cultures have the most boundary consent boundaries violated. There's the highest rates of sexual trauma in countries that are largely misogynistic and patriarchal. And I'm just saying this because it's literally in PubMed, all the
mm,
science. So we are heading into an era right now where there is, I believe, a bit of a war of the sexism reemerging. And I think we're at the cusp of a new sexual revolution. And I think it's really exciting to be alive right now because I think the world is in this very, very exciting place of wanting to shift culture around sexual experiences and sexuality. And there's way too much talk about gender, honestly. Like one of the things that we need to really focus on is like, are you embodying yourself as like who you really want to be sexually? And whether that's masculine or feminine, I don't care. Like I care about, are you being true to who you are? And are you being respectful and honorable to the people that you sleep with? And
mm,
whether it's your partner or whether you're non-monogamous, like the question is are you showing up in a way that is authentic and integrous in your relationships? And are you showing up in a way that's like too much taking energy? And I love, and I'm sure you've heard of the wheel of consent, but like everybody needs to learn the wheel of consent because people don't really understand consent, and as a result, society there's this whole movement of Me Too, and we're not really talking about what's underneath it, which is like there's not enough education of men in culture on how to actually, and women, by the way, too,
absolutely.
how to actually embody consent properly and how to respect boundaries properly and how to play with boundaries if you want
Mm,
to.
mm.
Like there's a lot of fun in playing with boundaries if you know how to communicate.
Yeah, and just to echo what what you've said, there was a study looking at the top 100 porn videos that are watched, and
Wow.
78% prioritize male pleasure and 18% prioritize female pleasure. So if the
Wow.
conversations aren't happening with kids and that's how they're learning about sex, and we know that, we know that under 10 kids are watching pornography, and I'm not slating porn, I'm just saying that if that's the place where education happens, there's this real lack of focus on female pleasure.
And there's a lack of focus on like the reality is that we have masculine and feminine energy within each of us. Okay. And so there's this concept of being an adaptive giver or an active receiver in our method. And this is I think, a unique perspective on purpose because we I I see what's going on in the world around gender, and I see that like people might look at our program as like heteronormative, and I want people to know that are listening that this method works whether you are gay or straight. This method works whether you are cis or trans. The point is that when you are engaging in sexual contact, there is someone usually in a more dominant position or in a more receptive position, more of a giving or a receiving. And so a woman on top who's basically moving her body consistently, she's in a more active role. And so she's embodying a little bit more of the masculine in that role, right? And then if you are in the receptive role and you have someone that's entering you are embodying perhaps we want to call the masculine and feminine more of the feminine position. but there's a dance happening every time we have sex. And so what I think is happening a lot on porn is there is an act of, there's the penetrated and the penetrating, and there's the dominant and the submissive. And typically it's the man and the woman, right? And what we see is this emphasis around the performative act of a woman giving a man the pleasure of the ejaculation. So rarely are we seeing women actually experiencing as much orgasmic arousal and pleasure as the man. And in fact, if you actually really do watch porn, like you see that a lot of women are actually quite uncomfortable. And I think that those sexual scripts are playing themselves out in societal problems. And it's like, okay, what would the world look like? I love these experiments of like asking, like thought experiments are really fun. So like, what if the world were flipped? What would the world look like if feminine pleasure was as valuable as masculine pleasure? Like, I would argue that everyone would be having way better sex. I would argue that like men would even be more turned on. Like, I know so many men that basically describe like witnessing a woman in full pleasure as one of the most erotic things they've ever seen in their entire lives. But a lot of men have never even seen that because they've never slowed down fast enough, or they've never slowed down enough to actually be present for a woman's pleasure.
Yeah.
And it takes longer. And sometimes for men it can take longer. Like there was a man in our program who described his sexuality as taking a lot longer than his female partner. So the point is not that like it's not that we need to demonize men for their behavior. It's that we need to emphasize that there's way more sex going to be happening for way more sex will be happening for everyone if women are brought to the table, and
Absolutely.
if women have more pleasure, everyone gets more sex.
Absolutely.
And you have to take less, right? There's less of a need to take because everyone's getting laid more. So I'm just like, I'm not here to like put men in a box and say you guys are all doing it wrong. But I am saying like, hey, you're missing out. You're really missing out here. And like, there's a lot more. Like, a lot of women don't want to have sex because their consistent experience is painful, and
Exactly.
that sucks.
And just to reiterate what you're saying, this enormous piece about slowing down. I often say to clients that, you're in the mountains. We think of sex as this kind of sprint to the top of the mountain. How quickly can you
Yeah,
reach the summit? But actually, rather slow right down, walk into a wooded area. What's around the back of the tree? Just look closely. Look at the little plants on the floor. Experience that. You may reach the summit or you may not, but it's going to be a very different, a very sensual, incredible experience, just slowing down and
yeah,
exploring this enormous mountain rather than always racing to the peak.
yeah. And like foreplay, it's not just what happens without your clothes on.
Mm,
Like you can develop like an erotic charge throughout the day, right? Like texting your partner something that you love about them, to telling them how on you are, giving them a kiss before you leave, making out with them before they leave the house for work, like touching them on the shoulder, like holding their hand at dinner, like all of those things matter. And even just conversation around sex, just talking about what your desires are, what you want. It's like the difference between riding the tram up and being completely silent on your phone by yourself versus having a conversation with people. It's like a very different experience on the gondola when you're
mm,
by yourself staring at your phone, or when you're actually engaging with the people that you're sitting with. And so I just think that like one of the things I learned from this guru, Sadhguru, I'm sure you've heard of him. He's just like world famous guru. He really preaches this concept of full involvement. And I think that like full involvement is like being fully present for whatever it is that you're doing in the moment. And so many of us, if we watch porn, we are literally involved in that scene in our head of the thing that turns us on, or not actually in full involvement with our partner. And so there is so much disconnection today in our phones, in the computers. And like one of the things that we aim to help people with this method is like bringing them back into their bodies and bringing them back into like an embodied sense of like, oh, this is what it's like to feel
mm,
everything.
mm,
And honestly, I think a lot of people really did experience some like pretty intense feelings come up for them because the program's designed to do that. It's designed to make you feel a lot. And I think that for a lot of people that are disconnected and disembodied, it can be a lot to get into your
mm.
body for the first time in a while.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know how to. because their sexual experience has been so external, it's so visually orientated, you know, just the invitation to connect into your body is alien
Yeah.
for a lot of people. So that in itself, it's almost the first week of how do I do that?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how important that is as we age as well. You know, our partner
Oh my
isn't
gosh.
going to look the
Like,
same in 30 years. Or if porn is the reference, you know, the real life woman or man looks different. So how can we actually be much more embodied and connected in our own, you know, erotic world rather than everything having to be visually stimulated?
I mean, I love you saying this, and this is a really important topic because I want the listeners that are out there listening. We did a bunch of marketing research on the people that applied for our program, and we found that the vast majority of people were in their 40s and 50s and even 60s. And so I loved discovering this because I was like, wow, now we have so much more information on how to help this group of people. But one of the things that comes up for a lot of people in long-term relationships is we do get older. We do have a different relationship with our bodies. But the thing that I want to emphasize to everyone listening is that you are not your body and you are not your mind. You are so much greater than this physical part of you. And the beauty of great connected sex where you feel the sense of transcendence beyond yourself is you realize that like you don't need this body to feel absolute ecstasy. Like we are so attached to these bodies of ours, but actually we need to get beyond them and going beyond the body and being completely connected in the moment in a state of absolute bliss and ecstasy is like you realize like you aren't this body. You are something much greater than this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, and ideally, if you learn this concept of suction sex, like as you get older and as your body changes and as you're you there, I mean, I'm 40. I just turned 40 in January and I'm already noticing changes in my sexuality. And like I'm like blown away at how lucky I am to have discovered this a lot of these things that Aaron Michael and Sayeda Desolé have taught me because my body's not going to be the same in the next decade. I'm going to have kids probably in the next 2 years. And that's going to change my body and that's going to change my hormones. And so is menopause and perimenopause is going to change me. And if you learn to move away from friction-based sexual contact and learn to engage in more suction-based sexual connection, you don't need to have as much stamina. You don't need to have as much movement during sex. You actually can move your hips more than your legs. It's less tiring and it doesn't require nearly as much lubrication because you're actually moving energy and blood flow to your genitals, enabling you to actually maintain better lubrication and erection so that you can actually engage in sex for longer, even though your body's changing. So
Mm-hmm.
it's really designed best for people who are like, you know what? Like my body's not the same as it used to be. And sex hurts. And so how do we make it less painful? How do we make it, how do I have a more sustained erection? It's really about not focusing on what we're seeing in porn, which is in and out, friction-based sex, which dries you out, which wears you out, and frankly causes a lot of pain in a lot of cases, and engaging in a more connected, slower sexual union that actually can create even more pleasure.
Mm.
And it's like I'm just stoked because I feel like this has been missing from sexual medicine, like actual sex education around sex itself. Like it's not really part of what you see. I never got any sex education in medical school. Like what we got taught about was like, these are the categories of sexual dysfunction. Here's the drugs available. There's nothing for women. Sorry. Like pretty much that was it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
that was pretty much it. And like I was kind of like as a doctor, I was not prepared about nutrition. I was not prepared about fitness. I was not prepared about sleep. I was not prepared around relationships. I was not prepared around sex. And I certainly wasn't prepared around environment. And I think these are the biggest drivers of metabolic health and your metabolic health and your mitochondrial health. The health of your mitochondria are the batteries of your cells. And the longer the better that you maintain these batteries, these engines of your cells, the longer you're going to live. And so it turns out that having a healthy sexual relationship is fantastic for your health. It's fantastic for your relationship. And if your relationship is healthy, then your stress levels are lower. If your
Yeah.
stress levels are lower, then you're not using up those batteries as quickly. You're not wearing those batteries down as fast. And so you're literally going to live longer. So, like, love is linked to longevity. There's literally an entire paper on this topic by Sue Carter. And regular sex releases lots of oxytocin. Oxytocin is implicated in the placebo response. The placebo response is your body's natural capacity to heal itself. So we know that oxytocin is linked to reduced inflammation, reduced impact of basically it's protective to the mitochondria, it's protective to the heart, and like all of these things you need to live a long and healthy life. So I'm basically convinced that high quality sexual connection is medicine. And we should be emphasizing this as like a health practice. This should be part of your routine, just like brushing your teeth, just like packing your lunch, just like going to the gym, is having sex with your partner. And we don't look at it like this. We don't. And Aaron and Sayeda, what they say, they basically taught me that like they believe in sex as a health habit. And I was like, my mind was like, whoa. So we need to make sex habitual. And that doesn't sound sexy, but actually it is, because it doesn't put pressure on you to perform. It just makes it a thing that you do out of knowing it's good for you, right? And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
some days are going to be fast, some days are going to be slow, some days are going to be quick, some days are going to be you're going to take your time. But the point is that maintaining that sexual contact and that sexual connection with your partner is going to keep your relationship stronger, and it's going to help you live longer.
Absolutely.
That's why I started this company. I mean, this is the core of it, is like I want people to basically bake it into their daily practices that like sex is medicine.
Mm. I sort of say to people, if we could spend as much time in the bedroom as we do in the gym, our health would be
Oh my
way better.
God,
But
totally.
we so prioritize, it's all about the body, it's prioritizing that. And people say, haven't got time.
It's all about how am I going to look in the bedroom and not how am I going to be in the bedroom, you know?
Yeah, but and ultimately, I wonder that when you spend that time and you're connected to that erotic self, you'll probably look better anyway.
I mean, everyone's telling me I'm glowing all the time, and so I'm pretty sure it's partially that. But I mean, the truth is that it has taken me my entire life to understand health. I mean, I decided I was going to become a doctor in third grade, or fifth grade, fifth grade. I did my first science, science fair on the design of the human heart when I was in third grade. And like, I have been obsessed with human health for my entire existence. And I feel like at 40, I'm just starting to be like, oh, okay, now I'm really ready to start teaching the world. And it's great. It's a great place to be because I feel like, I mean, I've definitely done a good amount of health education in the last decade, but I really didn't want to rush, like, really putting this kind of knowledge out into the world until I felt like it made sense scientifically. And because I can speak to the science of all of this, and like we are actually pioneering like education on like the physiology of pleasure right now. Like that's one of the things that we're trying to teach people is like pleasure and understanding your anatomy of pleasure is like really important because this wasn't taught to us in school. And one of the things that we want to do is we want to basically create a derivative course for college students and high school students and teach embodied consent and teach some basic facets of our sexual anatomy properly to students. And we're not going to go into the entire method because we can't. We know it's not really appropriate to teach the whole thing to students, but we think that a derivative course that's really emphasizing embodied consent, like preventing sexual trauma, educating people on how to understand their body's anatomy, how to understand and how to understanding the anatomy of pleasure in both people. I think that would make a really big difference in young people's lives. And so that's one of the things that we're going to be trying to roll out in the next year as well. And I think it might actually end up being a bigger part of our business than this specific therapy because I think every single college in the world needs to properly educate young people on their sexuality, and it's not being done. And it's just too important of a part of our lives to overlook.
Can you share any of the findings from the study so far? Or is it too early days?
It's a little too early to
Mm.
share the things that are out there, but it's looking like people like it looks like is a major improvement in orgasm and a major improvement in satisfaction. So these are two things that everyone, I mean, the one thing that like my friend who's this world-class investor and entrepreneur has taught me, he's like, when you're building a product, the most important thing that people are going to buy is that it does what it says it's going to do. And so if we actually measurably improved sexual satisfaction and orgasm in people, then we have a really solid place to market because we did what we set out to do, which is improve human sexuality. But what I'm really looking forward is seeing, did it affect intimacy? How did it affect intimacy? How did it affect attachment? How did it affect inclusion of other? How did it, there was some early signal around just more deeper emotional connection during sex, which I would argue makes sex far more pleasurable when you're emotionally connected. Like it's just such a night and day experience to have sex physically and emotionally. And I think a lot of men can have sex just physically, but for women, it's almost I find it almost impossible to enjoy sex unless I'm emotionally connected. And so if we can show that, then I'm gonna feel really confident that because like the main intention I had with the design of the study was like secretly it was designed to see if we could actually measurably improve love, and love being sexuality, intimacy, inclusion of other, passion, commitment, and intimacy, and then attachment. So like if we made a dent in these three things, then I can literally go out to the world and say we scientifically improved human love. And I'm just crossing my fingers and I'm going to jump up and down if we did it, because I think if we can do that, and I think I don't think even if we didn't do it in the first study, we'll do it in the second study, and
Absolutely.
we'll definitely be figuring it out as we go. Because the truth is that the platform we built it on was not perfect. Like there were some bugs in our software, and sometimes that can like create some setbacks in people's experiences, but I think there's enough data that can suggest that we can move the needle in these aspects of human love, and
Mm.
that's been the mission of the company from day one. And I'm actually really excited to even start talking to. We've got a bunch of therapists that are administering psychedelics for couples right now. So ketamine assisted therapy is actually becoming somewhat of a thing in couples therapy, and it's low dose ketamine. It's not high dose. It's like very low dose. So I'm really itching to run a study on clinics that are offering ketamine assisted therapy for couples and seeing if we can make a difference. I actually think it would potentially, for the really challenged couples that got stuck, I think that ketamine, in a very low dose, properly administered in a couples therapy context, could get people through those really challenging spots,
Mm.
and would actually get people through the other side, because you got to get out of your ego identity if you want to really transform, and that's hard to do if you've been stuck in resistance and resentment for years with a relationship. And I have a ketamine assisted therapy protocol in my practice, and it's really a phenomenal protocol. And so I'm very, very careful who I prescribe it to. I haven't prescribed it to anyone in months because I've been so on Adamo, but there is still part of me that knows that there is a role in psychedelics in helping couples move through major challenges in their relationships. But I don't think it's for everybody, and I think we need to figure out who are the best candidates for it,
That's my next
because
question. Who do you think it would be suitable for?
the people who are committed for the long run, that are not going to get divorced, that are like, nothing was going to break us apart. We are doing this for the long run. You can't, then nothing you can say can convince us to break up. I really do believe that like people who are super committed are like that. That's a starting point. If you are on the edge of divorce and you're like, we're pretty much on the way out, I don't think you should use psychedelics. And the reason why is because they were going to get you. There's evidence that MDMA is an oxytocin releasing agent, and oxytocin is the bonding hormone. So do you really want to be bonded to someone who you are potentially wanting to divorce? And one of the bigger investors in the MAPS company opened up to me about how he actually thinks that MDMA may have played a role in keeping him in a relationship that he probably should have ended many, many months prior. And it actually was really, really hard for him to end the relationship because he and his wife had done so many MDMA sessions together with a therapist. And so I think that if you have plans of getting divorced and you've thought about it and you're convinced that that's where you're probably going to end up,
Mm.
medicine is not going to save you. And although that being said, I know people who've had their marriages saved by psychedelics. It's still, to me right now, until we have more data, until we have more research, I just don't think it's what you should do. I really don't. I think and I'm saying that out of like knowing that there's probably a percentage of people that could be helped. I think more people would be harmed. And I think if the percentage of people that's going to be harmed versus helped is greater, then you can't recommend it. But I do think that when there's a person in a relationship who's experienced pretty profound trauma and pretty serious attachment wounds, um, psychedelics, I do think can actually help repair PTSD inducing trauma. And if that is the main thing that's affecting, like one of the things that I discovered in my research was that there's a lot of people who suffer from relationship problems because they have unresolved PTSD or unresolved sexual trauma. And it actually is the reason why their relationship isn't working. So if you can actually get that person to go through conjoint therapy with their partner, it can help their partner understand them better. It can help them understand themselves better. And it can help this person create stronger attachment patterns. And so I think that like for trauma-based problems in relationships, like we're finding incredible results for MDMA therapy. And I've seen remarkable results for ketamine in couples therapy. And so it's just I think it just is about how committed are these people to their growth, how committed they are to the relationship, and are they willing to take the risk that this may not work and it may open up things. You have to be willing to say that this experience might open up parts of the relationship that have been unsaid or undiscussed and could lead to a rupture and it could lead to a breakup. So if you are willing to take the risk, then take the risk. But if you are not willing to accept that these could have consequences, you have to have full informed consent. So if you are not fully informed by your doctor or therapist that this could break your relationship, just as much as it could fix your relationship, it could actually, even in people that are most committed, psychedelics can bring a lot of things up. So you have to have full informed consent about it, right? Like you have to know that there's risks. And if you're willing to take those risks, then yes, I think it's an experimental therapy that has quite a lot of historical use. But you have to have proper education and you should not have a family history or a personal history of psychosis or schizophrenia. You cannot have seizure disorders. You cannot have like undiagnosed or untreated cardiovascular issues. So there's a lot of physiological things that you have to rule out before you touch a drug.
Mm.
And so if you've ruled all those things out and you're willing to take the risk, yes, they can be phenomenal tools in helping people transform. But again, like so many disclaimers before someone goes off and takes drugs with their partner.
Yeah. Oh, it's something I was reflecting on. I mean, obviously, I'm in the UK, you're in the States, and I know every state is different, but I wonder what your thoughts are about the psychedelic renaissance over medicalizing psychedelics. And I
Yeah.
say that because I'm thinking in terms of couples and MDMA, we would almost need to pathologize something in the relationship. You mentioned PTSD for it to
Yeah.
be a viable treatment within healthcare, right?
Well, as somebody who's spent since 2021 studying this, hypoactive sexual desire is a very common sexual dysfunction in men and women. And a big driver of it is relationship problems, mood disorders, and trauma. So, there is this question that can you prescribe medicine for low desire if it is secondary to something else? So it's if it's hypoactive sexual desire secondary to a psychosomatic situation, is that something that you can get approved? Now, I don't know how the FDA would approach this because it's never been done before, but it's what I if like we've created some prototypes in our company for literal love drugs, and I have talked to lots of patent lawyers, and I've phenomenal people that work with me, but nobody's done this before. And so like there is this one product that we've developed that is a phenomenal aphrodisiac. And oh my God, I want to bring it to the market so badly. But it's like, I'd have to actually go to the FDA and say, hey, we have this thing we want to commercialize. It's a natural product for hypoactive sexual desire, secondary to psychosomatic sexual dysfunction. Is this something that we can commercialize for this problem space if we know that I mean, the thing about PTSD is secondary to social injury, right? and it's invisible scars on people, but it is a psychological condition. If you actually look at most depression is due to, if you actually ask a person what caused their depression, most people will describe a pretty major event in their life that set it off. It's usually there's a predisposition genetically, and then there's a social experience that, like, for example, grief, loss, um, divorce, losing a job, losing a child, like having a major injury. Like usually people who get depressed had a pretty clear preceding factor. But just because that factor preceded the depression doesn't mean we don't treat the depression, right? So I mean, look, I'm in here for the long haul. I've got to, I'm putting my career on the line for this, but we do have products that we want to study in clinical environments. It's just a matter of like, it's kind of like we have to, the reason why we wanted to develop this study first on our sex therapy is because we think we can actually create some revenue from just educating people around sexuality. But the reality, I think that the truth is that if we combined our method with psychedelics in the right population, we would see double the effect changes in people. I think we would see massive improvements. And so what we want to do is run little tiny studies in places like Oregon and Australia where it's legal, or even Jamaica or even Mexico, where there are places where you can get there are legal frameworks in place. Even Canada, you can run studies. And if we just run a small pilot study on our method, then it's possible that we can potentially, start going to the FDA and say, okay, we want to get this thing commercialized.
Mm,
But it's a long journey. And it
mm,
would be a long path. But Viagra was the best-selling drug of all time. So I'm not giving up, but I'm very carefully moving forward. And honestly, like clear having some clear study results from just our method alone, just like it's like relit this fire under my butt to be like, oh my God, this actually works. Like, what if it worked better with this other thing, you know? And by the way, what we are focused on is not hallucinogenic medicine, is actually non-hallucinogenic psychedelics, which I was initially very like cautious about, because I was like, my thoughts were you needed to trip in order to get the big effect. But I am now very much within the belief that you really don't need to trip in order to get the same effects on the body. I think there's very, almost very sub-perceptual amounts of these medicines that could actually lead to huge effects on sexual function. So I'm stoked about the future. Really,
mm.
really.
I was just thinking, what about the other end, anti-love drugs, when people are suffering from broken hearts or, in a really terrible way and desperately wanting to heal from those wounds.
Yeah. Well, there is actually one researcher in Canada who has a method for dealing with heartbreak using beta blockers. And what they do is they have you go into therapy to talk about your relationship ending, and you're on a drug that slows your heart rate when normally it would raise. And so you're reprogramming your autonomic nervous system to not react to the trigger. The best thing I have found for dealing with breakup is 100% no contact. Like, it is a huge makes a huge difference. Just like, you just do not contact this person. If you were broken up with someone, like, the more you interact with them, the more you're going to get those feelings of missing them. And like, even if they were like abusive to you, you might actually just like your brain is still addicted, right? Um, and I actually do totally believe that microdosing is a great, I mean, is a great underappreciated tool in the toolbox for treating depression. I think we're going to see microdosed medicines and sub-perceptual based psychedelics that are going to get approved, and they're going to be better drugs for SSRI than SSRIs. And if you talk to a person who's gone through a breakup, it's very much like a low-level depression. Sometimes it's a total depression. And I've seen people anecdotally in the underground world self-medicating with microdosing. And the caveat being, it's going to bring up anything under the surface. So you can't really avoid your pain. And typically processing your pain in real time is actually the best way to get through it. It's not suppressing it, not ignoring it, but actually dealing with it. Um, I got really lucky in this last breakup that I was in a ashram when it happened, and I was actually getting this education from Sadhguru's teachers on how to do a bunch of really cool meditations, breath work practices, and yoga practices that had created this foundation of well-being within me that literally catapulted me forward after this breakup to like levels of well-being and bliss that I didn't even know were possible. So I am also very, very big believer that like do not underestimate the power of spirituality to help you heal from really terrible experiences. And I mean, the last few months of my life, my whole life was turned upside down, and I'm the happiest I've been in a decade. And so it's pretty remarkable that like we are so much more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. And it's not just about, I really don't think that like we should be medicalizing everything. I think that when you go through major challenges in life, it is a wake up call to what needs to change. And if you embrace the change wholeheartedly and don't resist any of it, you can literally go through this dark night of the soul and then come out the other end with this elixir of immortality that the hero's journey is all about. It's like literally about bringing your lessons forward and actually embracing the darkness and then moving into the light, right? Like you don't avoid it, you don't run from it, you don't medicate it, you actually go through it. And going through it is how you end up in this whole nother place in your life where you're actually ecstatically happy. It's like it's pretty incredible. And so I think that I'm all about optimization. I optimize my physiology, I optimize my psychology, but the spiritual piece, I only started optimizing in the last 4 months. And it was because of my previous relationship that I emphasized it. And because of that breakup, I was able to actually go through a major spiritual awakening to a new place of well-being and happiness and gratitude that I haven't felt in so long. And so don't always turn to medicine and therapy to fix your problems. Like sometimes you got to turn to God and a higher power.
Yeah, I love that idea that sort of spirituality and consciousness is the new paradigm of healthcare.
Yeah. I mean, it could be. The thing is that like I'm still aware that like the modern religion we're all worshiping is science. And so I am the kind of spiritual person that's trying to always find, okay, but what does science tell us about spirituality? And you know what I've learned is that pretty much all of the evidence for spirituality improving health links back to human connection. It actually links back to close relationships and community bonds. And what did I do when went through this breakup? I immediately went out. I didn't isolate myself. I went out into the community and I made like 20 friends and 20, maybe 30 friends in the last month. So I went hard on building community in a town where I only knew a handful of people. And I felt so much love and support from just putting myself out there and making friends and being surrounded by people. And that led to me meeting a new person. And so I want to emphasize to people listening that it's not that hard. It's not like you have to go to Sadhguru's ashram like I did, even though you totally should, because his programs are amazing. And the programs that I did for those listening are inner engineering, hatha yoga training with Surya Kriya and Yogasanas. And then I also did Shunya and Bhavaspandana. So anyone listening out there, that's the sequence that I did. Highly recommend it. But if you're also listening and you're wondering how the heck did she make so many friends so fast? First of all, you have to ignore awkwardness and just basically assume that the whole world is awkward and that you can just have fun being weird. Okay. So just like embrace your weirdness, go talk to strangers, talk people up in coffee shops, talk people up on the street, be friendly, and just say, hey, I'm new here. And be fearlessly friendly. Okay. Fearlessly friendly is the way that I kind of operate. So I made 3 new friends on the gondola today and 3 new friends on the tram today. And it was because I was just by myself smiling
Mm.
and being really happy and just choosing to wake up and be happy. Right. But then I also have this habit, and this is like the biggest hack of friendliness. I get everyone's number. I don't care who it is. I don't care who they are. I'm like, hey, will you be my friend? Can I get your number? And it's so weird, right? It's like the craziest thing because a lot of people, if you hand your phone to someone with an open, with an open ad contact, people, there's a sales tactic, right, in the world that I learned from my friend John Meyer, John Michael, who is a phenomenal salesperson. He's like, Molly, the secret to closing people is you give them a form to fill out. So I hand my phone to someone and say, hey, can I get your number? And I go, hey, would you mind if I add you to my WhatsApp group for all my friends in town? Because I'm just like new here and everyone I meet, I just add to this WhatsApp group. nobody has said no yet. And so I have like 22 people in a WhatsApp group right now. It is that simple. Like you just, and by the way, if someone rejects you, so what? You weren't meant to be their friend anyway. And honestly, like there's no risk associated with it. So like this is my secret hack to building community in rapid time. And I learned how to do it in Austin. And the funniest thing now is like the guy that I'm dating is like lives in a town of 108 people. And I built a community of about 80 women in like 6 to 8 months in Austin. And I'm like, man, I don't know if I can live in this town of 108 people because it's like too small for me. And then I'm like, wait, who's the mayor of this town? And he's like, we don't have a mayor. I'm like, I should run for mayor. That would actually motivate me a lot to actually stick around and like contribute. Like, so I'm like, I've got to be a resident there for 6 months, but in 6 months, I actually might run for mayor of this tiny town if we're still dating. So like,
Amazing.
yeah, it's
And
great.
as you do that, Molly, I just experience my heart opening. When you meet people with that warmth, right? They just they meet you
Here,
back.
I'm by myself. Will you be my friend? And from there, I got invited to a conference. I got invited to go skiing with people. I met some guides. I've got a new boyfriend. Like, people often look at breakups as like this massive breakdown and they sit and they isolate and they get sad. But I am like a living testament that you can transform after a breakup and after pain and suffering and hurt. And it's a choice, it's a choice. Like there's this quote by Carlos Castaneda that we make ourselves happy or make ourselves miserable. The amount of effort is the same. And it really is true. Like you have to decide to be happy and you have to decide to work at it every single day, especially when all the things in your life are changing around you. And I'm also a big believer of the law of attraction. I know it's very hippie, but I really do believe that your internal world creates your external world. And when I am happy inside, things change outside. When I'm infectiously excited, the whole world around me shifts. And it's awesome.
Yeah. I had the pleasure of going to a Joe Dispenza retreat in Orlando last year, and it was just awesome. Ultimately, that's what it's saying. You are your personality, what you think. We think the same thoughts every day, 90% of the same crap, and we expect our life to be different. Be that difference, think that difference into existence.
And I think a lot of us, when we're dating, I mean, a lot of people are like always looking for the person to be the person that they want them to be, right? And I saw something on Instagram recently, and it was like, if you want love, be loving. If you want to be in love, then be the kind of person that you would fall in love with. And I was like, wow, like it really all starts within us. It's not about the other person because like we are literally creating the world around us by how we interact with it. And I'm just like, gosh, I'm so excited about the future of health and medicine because I think if we can really perpetuate this idea that like investing in your relationships and investing in your relationship with yourself and others will get you to live longer, then we'll see a shift in society. We'll start educating young people. And like, part of the reason why I'm like very excited about this place I live in Jackson right now. So there's only 30,000 people who live here year round. It's a teeny tiny town compared to living in San Francisco or Peoria, Illinois, or Austin or LA or Florida. And there's something really, really beautiful about small town life. And I think people are going to start returning to it a bit. I think there's going to be a shift of people realizing and waking up that like community is what really matters. Family and community, that's what matters. And if you invest in it, you just get dividends in your health.
Mm. Mm. Molly, where do you see the future of psychedelic sex therapy, couples therapy? What does it look like
Well,
for you?
I think that right now, it's first off, there's going to be a lot of research and development that's going to be necessary. But I think that if anybody wants to actually kind of look at this concept as a whole, there's a great book by Brian Earp called Love Drugs, and it paints this ethical framework um, around like what is actually possible for this space and also what's risky about this space. So like I have a whole talk on aphrodisiacs and psychedelics. And I have an entire talk on sexual ethics, psychedelic sexual ethics. And I think that basically couples that are going to embark on this journey, which by the way, before MDMA was banned, it was used in 500,000 people legally for couples therapy. So it would never have been used that much if it didn't have some effect. So I think that we are going to see a resurgence in research, but very, very importantly is there is so much discussion that needs to be had around the ethics of this, because there are major power dynamics that develop. So like you should never, ever, ever be coerced into taking a drug by your partner or by a physician or therapist because they think it'll help you. Coercion is never going to be okay. Second of all, both parties have to have serious informed consent before they embark in something like this. It's really, really important that the relationship is evaluated properly by therapists to ensure that it's not an abusive relationship, because physical or sexual abuse is rampant and physical and emotional abuse is rampant. And you do not want to bond to a person that is emotionally, physically, or sexually abusing you. So it's really important for individuals to be interviewed separately by the therapists before they actually engage in the medicine. And then there needs to be independent confirmation that can verify consent, authenticity. And then there's always a risk, as I mentioned, that, psychedelic experience could precipitate a breakup. And then if using psychedelics in a therapeutic context, therapists have to be aware that this and they need to inform the couples individually and together that the medicine can shift your identity, it can shift your personality, and it can shift your belief systems. So like it is literally psychic surgery. So you need to choose your therapist and your shaman like you would your neurosurgeon, because you could actually permanently alter the structure of your mind. And I have found, at least for my own experiences, that when I was, I don't use psychedelics currently, but when I was younger, I did, and it literally led to lasting changes in my personality around openness. It made me an open person. I was not this person that I was a decade ago because of psychedelics. So like, you do not want to take this if you like who you are and you don't want anything to change. I personally didn't like who I was, and I wanted a lot of things to change. And then for therapists, there's already been lawsuits between therapists and patients on inappropriate touch in the MAPS community. So that already happened once. In the underground world, there is a lot of bad behavior happening. And there's actually a lot of like powerful medicine being administered. And I have seen far too many stories so far of like really inappropriate behavior between shaman and participant. And I'm not happy about that. And I think that because of that, we do have to like educate more people about the importance of understanding that psychedelics magnify transference, countertransference, and attachment. And there's really big risks of sexual exploitation due to uneven power dynamics, not only between patient and practitioner, but also practitioner and trainees. So I've seen sexual inappropriate behavior between therapists and shaman, between physician and patient, between therapist and patient, between physician and trainee. I mean, like it's happening. And so it is actually one of the biggest reasons why psychedelics can help you sexually is opening you up, enabling you to shift your identity, basically creating more openness psychologically. All of those things make you at risk for being taken advantage of, being put in a situation where where it's hard to have consent. So it's like, ugh, right? Like the reason why I'm interested in this is because a lot of the reasons why this stuff can help is a lot of the reasons why it can harm. Like it changes your brain's function, it changes your structure, it makes you more open, helps you get out of your ego, but that also puts you at risk. And so because we need part of the reason why I'm on podcasts like this is because we can create ethical frameworks that address these adverse outcomes. We can educate individuals that like if you don't know what you're doing, you can get hurt. If we educate everybody, then we will live in a much safer world. But my sort of stance on it is like, until we have these ethical frameworks in place, until we have proper education by therapists and physicians and patients, until we actually understand how to create the safest context for people to engage in these medicines, you're putting yourself at risk. And so don't do that unless you know what you're doing. And that's kind of like, it's the same thing about like getting surgery, right? Like, would you want to would you want to go and do backcountry skiing without avalanche training? No. Avalanche training is mandatory before you go and do something that could be dangerous, but also like totally incredible, right? So, this is risky medicine. And the over medicalization of it is also potentially going to diminish some of the power of the indigenous influence and the ritual of creating these like transformative contexts that are not in clinical environments. So we have we have a lot of work to do before we're ready to make this prime time.
Molly, thank you so much. It has been so wonderful to speak to you. Is there a question that you wish I'd asked just before we finish? Is there anything that I haven't asked that you wish I had, and how would you answer it?
I would say, what would I have asked? I guess the question I have for you is, what did you think of the Adamo method? Like, what were your experiences with it? Like, what did it teach you?
I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the slowness. That's a piece that I'm always telling people, slow down. So I quite like that slowness. I definitely noticed when the pace increased. In fact, we didn't do the last couple of weeks. So we need to come back to that. For me, one of my favorite exercises was the one kind of harmonizing intimacy, raising our legs, that piece about when you're ready. So kind of making this commitment that we're going to spend this time together, at 9 p.m. every night or every other night, and then entering that space, having that connection, and then just noticing if you're available. And there are times when there's a no, and the more you practice that, the more okay it is to receive a no either way. So experiencing that consent piece, I've really enjoyed that. And the experience of pushing down on the pelvic floor, releasing your pelvic floor, which, I talk about that with pelvic floor physios, but actually putting it into a practice that feels less clinical and is relational is such a beautiful part of it.
That is so great to hear. I love this feedback. And yeah, I think one of the things that I heard from a lot of people because we had more than one therapist in our program, and just the number of people who'd been to a PT and like learned these things, but never embodied them in a relational context. And I mean, these little simple things like breathing in and pushing out your pelvic floor and using your mind to direct your energy to your pelvic floor and just realizing like you can arouse yourself is a really empowering tool in the toolbox for sexual connection.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to see the results when they're out, and I just wish you the best of luck, and we'll stay in touch.
Yeah, I love that.
So lovely to chat, and enjoy the rest of your day, Molly.
Have a wonderful day.
You too. Bye. Bye.
Bye.
You've been listening to The Psychedelic Couch. For more episodes, please follow me on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever you get your podcasts, and find me on Instagram at The Psychedelic Couch and at Claire Faulkner Therapy, where I will be keeping you up to date on the latest episodes and information surrounding all things therapy, psychedelics, and expanded states.